If you're working on a memoir, you need an outline. Unfortunately, writing a memoir without an outline is essentially just journaling. And as much as y'all know I love a good journaling session, I know that what you want from your manuscript is a finished book. That's why today I want to talk about the four biggest mistakes I see so many aspiring memoirists make. Number four is really going to surprise you. Stay tuned. You know what they say, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And this is exactly what holds so many people back on their memoir projects. That is exactly why we created the Memoir Method Checklist, a full, complete list of every single step you need to take to get that memoir written, published, and marketed successfully. You can download it now at pageandpodium.com/checklist. One question that I always ask prospective members of the Memoir Method is how much work they've gotten done on their memoir. Now, in this group program, we take everybody from people who have the whole messy draft of your memoir all the way through to it's just an idea, probably that you've had for years, but that you haven't really gotten started on. That doesn't matter. We are set up to meet you where you are. The reason that I ask how much people have gotten done is I find that it's really illuminating to hear about where folks are struggling. And I like to bring the lessons that I get from chatting with folks about their memoir onto this channel so that y'all can benefit from it too. And one of the things that I will very often hear people say is, well, I have an outline, but I'm not sure if I did it right. Now, if you are listening on audio or reading on a blog post, I want to just say I put this right into scare quotes for a very specific reason. Oftentimes, when we are trying to do something for the first time, write your memoir, outline your memoir, we feel really tied to this concept of the right way versus the wrong way. It's really, really scary to go forward into the unknown of a big project like a book when you aren't really sure if you're doing it right. Because we want some reassurance, we want to know if we are going in the right direction or if we're wasting all of this time. And that is one thing that I find is so common among so many memoir authors, is that really we want the best pathway forward for us. And oh my gosh, it is so hard to find that in the sea of advice out there. And that's one thing that I want to mention here, because while there is no right or wrong, one of the biggest missteps I see as people start to work on their memoir outline is that they're actually not using memoir outlining techniques. They are using techniques borrowed from other genres. And this is really important because memoir is a really specific type of writing. We talk about this all the time, by the way, in the memoir method, because it really matters that a memoir is a narrative structure, meaning you are telling a story that you hope will be engaging, and it's also true. So let's kind of go into that a little bit, and then I want to talk about why that causes people such issues. And then, of course, I'm going to talk about these four things that I see happening all the time. I bet you're doing at least one. And number four, I think it's going to surprise you. Okay, so when we're talking about kind of memoir as a genre, one of the things I want you to keep in mind is that we have really two competing purposes. On one hand, we are trying to tell a story. I often refer to this as memoir that reads like fiction, because what we're aiming for is that same beautiful arc rising to a climax with a denouement. The way that we expect a story to read in a novel is the same way we want our memoir to read. But unlike novelists who can change and shift that story to be more interesting, who can make sure that those pinch points happen exactly where they're supposed to, we don't have the benefit of that in memoir. Memoirists are telling the truth. Your story happened the way it happened. Your life unfolded the way it unfolded. And what that means is we have to be much, much more careful in the way that we are outlining than, say, a novelist who has lots of leeway and flexibility. And often, by the way, novelists often plan to just rewrite the whole thing. So they're kind of a different world, right? And at the same time, nonfiction, general nonfiction, those genres don't tend to require us to have this exciting build of a story. Sure, we're going to put anecdotes in there, we're going to put personality in there, but we don't have the same demand to make sure that that story reads well, like fiction, even though it is a true story. And what this leads so many people to is cobbling together this kind of way of coming at their memoir that's really bringing together all of these different kind of principles from different genres in a way that often just does not serve memoirists. We need our own way that is made specifically for us. By the way, that is why I created our group program, the Memoir Method. But all that aside, really, there are two underlying causes for all of the mistakes I see in memoir outlining. Either you have too much information on how to outline your memoir, or you have too little information on how to outline your memoir. So I suspect that a lot of our channel viewers are in the first camp, so let me start with that. What it looks like to have too much information to outline your memoir is that you have probably been down the rabbit hole of how to structure your story. You may have even seen the webinar that I did for Readsy pretty recently on how to structure your memoir that reads like fiction. You may be watching other folks like me who have different kind of takes on how to get that memoir outline down. Probably you are hearing things like, if you don't use the hero's journey, you cannot get a traditional book deal. That is not true, by the way. Many memoirs have been written without any attention at all to the hero's journey. And in fact, as Emily, my right hand in the Memoir Method, often shares, when you're in an MFA program, when you're in these kind of literary spaces, oftentimes things like hero's journey are really frowned upon because it's kind of a cookie cutter approach, right? Oh my gosh. Well, we start to get into this just vortex of information and it's all contradicting each other. It's so difficult to know what to do. And it's so easy for this to lead to just functional freeze. We're overwhelmed. We don't know what to do. So we just don't do anything. So if you're in the too much stage, let me just give you permission to step back and process and think about whether it actually might be more helpful to have someone help you with this hands-on rather than try to get all of the information off of YouTube. And by the way, we are offering rolling acceptance to the Memoir Method. So if it sounds good to have some support on your outline, reach out and let me know. Let's get you in that program. Now, on the other side, you may have too little information to outline your memoir. Now, this can look kind of one of three ways. The first is you are intentionally trying not to read about ways to outline your memoir because you don't want to be influenced by others. Now, this is a really good impulse in a lot of ways. We don't want you to take your true story and shoehorn it into the hero's journey. We don't want you to take your true story and shoehorn it into Save the Cat. What we want you to do is take your true story and shape it into something that actually serves both your story and your audience. But there is not going to be any generic writing advice on the internet that's going to tell you how to do that. That is the sad truth. And what happens to so many people is that because they can't find that information, they just decide to go without an outline. This is really harmful, and I cannot say enough times, if you are writing a memoir without an outline, you are really just journaling. You are not making the progress that I know you want to make. Having too little information will do that. The second way that I see this kind of too little information show up is that people will say, well, I just want to write and kind of see what happens. I think as I start writing the scenes, it's going to kind of take shape for me, and then I'll get a sense of what I want the book to be. This is also a good impulse in a lot of ways. Again, we're not just on the internet trying to take kind of cookie cutter approaches and shoehorn our story in. At the same time, though, when we are just writing scenes with no kind of clear direction, there will be a point at which you will end up with a big mass of pages of writing that do not fit together, that do not make a book. It is just simply brainstorming. And what I find is that so many people will get to the end of that manuscript draft and have 200 pages with no structure at all. Now, this isn't the end of the world, actually. This can be an okay way to start. And if you have found yourself in this position, I have good news for you. We work with folks just like you in the Memoir Method. But the bad news is, oftentimes if you start this way, without an outline, you're getting that stuff down on the page without really thinking about the structure, you're usually going to have to basically start over and rewrite the book. It will be easier because you have those scenes written, but it won't be as much easier as you might think. we are in fact going to have to go in there and rewrite. So we don't want to do this either, although again, I do understand the impulse. And then the third reason that I see that people are kind of going forward with too little information and kind of having some trouble is that they have a very specific kind of alternative structure in mind. I love an alternative structure. I think this is so fun. And in fact, we have a member of the Memoir method right now who is working with an alternative structure. And I don't want to give too much of her book away. Shout out to Diana. But it is such a cool way of taking her professional skills, the things that she has learned in her job, and using kind of those skills or data points to structure her memoir. But it is not enough simply to structure her memoir based on those data points. And one of the things that we've worked with her to really achieve, and this book is so good, by the way, one of the things we have really worked with her on is how to get both the narrative structure of a really strong story and that really cool alternative structure that is kind of what people see, even though the narrative that underlines it is so important. So oftentimes I will see that if folks have kind of an interesting structure like that, maybe you want it to be, a set of letters, maybe you want it to kind of use data points as Diana's book does, maybe you've got something else in mind. All of those things are like really, really cool, right? But unfortunately, when we kind of start at that point, it doesn't really give us that much information on how to actually structure the story. It really gives us more information on kind of what the chapters individually will look like. We need both, of course, right? So we've got this issue of too little information that is going to derail us in the same way that having too much information is. And unfortunately, it is so hard to find that sweet spot, that balanced point where you know exactly what you need to do. The easiest way to do that is with some support. But in case you are not quite ready to reach out for some support, let me give you these top 4 mistakes just so that you can kind of be on the lookout for ways that your outline might not be serving you, even when you have put the time in to set that structure up. Okay, so the first error that I see so often, I kind of teased earlier in this video, is thinking that there is a right versus a wrong structure for a memoir. Now, I know that there are folks out there who will tell you there is only one right way to structure a memoir, and that is not true. In fact, as I go through these mistakes, I think you're going to kind of see why that's not true. But let me talk a little bit about it just so that you have some baseline here. When we're talking about a publishable memoir, we are talking about a memoir that tells an engaging story. Whether you want to think about it as a memoir that reads like fiction, that's how I usually think about it. If you have a different way that you want to think about what engaging means, that's fine. But a solid memoir is always going to tell a solidly structured story. There will always be a strong narrative arc, even, by the way, in a memoir of essays. There is always going to be some forward movement to that climax and to a resolution or a denouement every single time. But there are many, many ways to get that narrative shape. And in fact, one of the things that I want to tell you, it's kind of like insider secret, is that all of those story structures, the hero's journey, save the cat, 3-act even, these are all things that were written based on stories that worked. The hero's journey, just like every other one of these structures, was not made to be prescriptive. It was meant to be descriptive. It was made from looking at these narratives that stood the test of time and saying what is common to all of these stories. From there, we can kind of see what makes a story structure work, and that's great. That is really, really useful. But when we try to pigeonhole ourselves into these story structures, we're really doing something that they weren't designed to do. Those structures, Hero's Journey in particular, were designed to be descriptive, not prescriptive. And so as we try to force ourselves to use these types of structures, we're really doing ourselves a huge, huge disservice. There is no right or wrong structure. The main thing is that your outline serves you. Your structure should serve your audience and your story. And as you finish up your outline, you should have a pretty clear plan. That's all that matters. There's no right or wrong way to go about putting that outline together. Okay, number 2, the second most common mistake that I hear about is stopping at what we call your internal outline. Now, in the memoir method, the entire first unit is just going to take you through outlining, developing your outline, and as I'll spoil for a little bit later, getting feedback on your outline. And as you're going through all of these steps, we have folks go from what's called an internal outline to an external outline. The internal outline is what I find so many people think of when they think of an outline. Now, years ago, I used to teach at the college level, and I often taught a class called public speaking, which I know is everybody's most dreaded class. I liked it, but a lot of people hate it, I know. Anyway, as we would talk about putting speeches together, one of the things that I always went over was how to do a speech outline. Now, in the context of a speech, where we want to end with our outline is very, very brief keywords, right? Because we're trying to kind of glance down and be able to look up and address our audience while being able to see our notes, figure out where we're supposed to go next. But this is not the way that you're going to put together a memoir outline that serves you. Instead, when you put together that keyword outline, what you're really putting together is the internal outline. You are putting together keywords that will allow you to glance at that piece of paper and see what's coming next. The problem is, when we're talking about putting a speech together, usually we're talking like, well, a month, right? From the time that you finalize that outline, you're practicing with it, you're delivering the speech. When you are talking about writing a memoir, we are probably talking about at least 5 to 6 to 8 to 10 months of drafting. Now, in your first few chapters, you will remember what those keywords were. And as I've talked about very often on this channel, often our first few chapters are pretty easy anyway. We've kind of written them in our head. What happens with this kind of internal keyword outline is that as we go through the memoir writing process, we quite literally forget what we were trying to tell ourselves to do in that outline. Once we get to chapter 15, 16, 18, 20, we don't remember what those brief little keywords are. And this is why we have every member of the memoir method transition their internal outline, their outline for their eyes only, into an external outline. Now, an external outline is pretty simple. Once you have that internal outline together, all you're doing with your external outline is taking each one of those chapters and writing usually 100 to 150 word description of what is going to happen in that chapter. Now, I'm not talking about including every flashback you might want to put in there. I'm not talking about weaving in kind of all the data that you want to lean on. What I am talking about is what happens in your story during that chapter. 100 words, maybe 150 if you feel like you need it. But the purpose of this is so that when we get to chapter 17, we know exactly what that chapter is supposed to do, right? We have created this outline that does not depend on us remembering the outline we made 5 months ago. We have an outline that we can look at and know exactly what we're supposed to do with this chapter, and that is basically a writing plan. So as you are putting your outline together, do not stop at that internal outline. Don't stop at the your eyes only. Go ahead and put together that external outline. This is, by the way, not only something that's going to help you in the writing process, but if you do decide to pitch for a traditional book deal, you're going to need a detailed outline. Now, by the time you finish the manuscript, will you need to probably adjust that outline a bit? Oh, for sure. But just keep in mind that you still have a starting point. You still have experience in writing out that detailed outline. And probably a good chunk of that outline you put together will be able to be used in your book proposal as part of that required detailed outline. So it's a win-win. Okay, the next big mistake that I see people make all the time is skipping the feedback and revision stage for your outline. Now, I know this is not a common thing that we hear talked about, and it's not something really that I have seen in other types of programs. But one thing that we have every Memoir Method member do is get feedback from us, Emily and I, as well as trusted friends and family on how that outline reads. Now, this is a little bit tricky because, of course, your outline is not your book. There are many things that will not show up in your outline that, of course, are very, very important to your book. But the thing we want you to keep in mind is that once you have that detailed outline, that external outline, once that is set up, once you have really put the time and thought into that, Any outside person should be able to look at your outline and give you feedback on whether the story makes sense. Does this event lead to this event, lead to this event, lead to this event? Do you have that basic chain of causality in your story that really any solid narrative is going to need? An outside person can tell you that, even when you are so close to the outline that you're not able to see it yourself. If you have that developed, detailed outline, you can get feedback on that. You can get feedback on whether the events make sense. You can get feedback on whether your message is coming through. You can get feedback on whether the topic feels clear and tight. All of this is stuff that you cannot get with that internal outline, but that if you expand it to an external outline, to a detailed outline, you're going to have so much great feedback before you start writing. And how much easier to revise that outline than it's going to be to revise that full manuscript months down the line. So much easier. This is why we have everybody do it in our group. Get feedback on your outline. Okay, and my final tip. This one is the one that I think trips people up a lot. The final mistake that I see people make is that they think finished memoirs, published memoirs that you can buy from Amazon at the bookstore, reflect the author's outline. This is simply not true. It is so easy to think that we can pick up another author's memoir, look through it, and see what the structure is, see how they had outlined it. But what happens when you write a memoir is not only are you getting feedback on that outline and revising that outline, but as you go through the book, changes are going to happen. And in fact, I kind of think of this as a secret pro tip. You're going to put this outline together, and I want you to put the time and thought into it because it really will serve you to do that. And it is okay if you deviate from your outline. Everybody does. There will be changes as you are writing. And for that reason, looking at other authors' finished books to see how you should outline your manuscript is not going to be a useful exercise. We can glean a lot from other authors' books, and in fact, you should. In the Memoir Method, we ask people every week what you're reading because it's so important that you are reading as you are writing. But do not believe that a finished, published, heavily edited book is the same thing as a manuscript. They aren't the same. And what that means for your outline is that you have the freedom you need to adjust both as you are outlining and along the process of revising the outline, writing the book, revising the book, having the book edited, and so on and so forth. We are putting this outline together to guide us through, but that does not mean that outline will be the same as your finished book, the same way that other people's finished books aren't really comparable to your outline. Get the outline done anyway. I promise it is going to be worth your while. And in fact, if you're kind of wondering where we fit the outlining piece into our Memoir Method group program, you can get a sneak peek. Download our Memoir Method checklist at pageandpodium.com/checklist. And it's going to give you all kinds of information, not only on the steps that we have people take to get to their outline, it's about a 7-step process, but also on what comes next. And I promise this is going to be so beneficial to you to have a real 10,000-foot view of the entire process. So if you have not downloaded that checklist, go immediately, pageandpodium.com/checklist. But for now, I want to leave you with one last thought, and that is that I know it is overwhelming to put that outline together. I know it feels like you're going to miss something. I know it feels like you're kind of forgetting things along the way already. And sometimes it even feels like you are unfairly or unethically manipulating your story to fit particular standards of the industry. But all of those things are just your own anxieties bubbling up. It happens to every single one of us. I would love to be your eyes and ears to help you kind of get grounded in what you're trying to do, to help you make sure that that outline is serving you and your story and your reader and your book. If I can help, we're now accepting rolling applications to the Memoir Method. If you would like this kind of hands-on support, if you would like a nonfiction expert and a fiction expert to look at your outline for you and just tell you where you're making the mistakes, I would love to provide you that service. I would love to work with you to get this book out in the world and help you accomplish this very, very worthy dream. You deserve it. Let me know if I can help. Otherwise, happy writing. You've got the story, you've got the idea, you just don't know the steps in the process. If this is what's holding your memoir back, I have got the solution for you. The Memoir Method Checklist is going to take you through every single step you need from idea to published marketable book. And you can download it now at pageandpodium.com/checklist.